It was a stunning move by the incoming U.S. president. Shape up or ship out. Trump vowed that on his first day in office, he'll impose a 25% tariff on anything Canada or Mexico exports to America if their border security doesn't improve. The slap would hit all the provinces hard, and consumers on both sides of the border even harder.
It's like a family member stabbing you right in the heart. What I found unfair about the comments is to compare us to Mexico. And I can tell you, Canada is no Mexico. We do approximately, just Ontario alone, $500 billion of two-way trade. I found his comments unfair. I found them insulting.
Ontario is Canada's biggest exporter, but Alberta has a unique relationship with America. A staggering 90% of Alberta's exports head south of the border, including 3.3 million barrels of crude oil every day. If you include all of this province's exports to the U.S. last year, from food and agriculture to oil and gas, that totaled more than $156 billion. This isn't the first time that Trump has thrown Canada for a loop with over-the-top tariffs. In 2018, Trump's government imposed 25% on Canadian steel. Ottawa turned around and responded in kind with 25% tariffs on American steel. What the federal government will do this time is still unknown, but Alberta's premier is vowing to fight. We sat down with Alberta Premier Danielle Smith earlier this week. Premier, thank you so much for making time for us. I know it's incredibly busy here in the legislature right now as you figure out how to handle these tariffs.
Yeah, well, thanks for being here, and thanks for your interest, because 25% tariffs across the board with no exemptions, that's going to hurt every Canadian province. And so I think it's why you've seen that the premiers have taken such a vocal position on it so soon.
Well, what did you think when you heard this 25%? I mean, especially for oil and gas, I'd imagine that could be devastating to the Alberta economy.
Well, it's much higher than I expected him to lead with. I thought we were talking about a 10% tariff, which was going to be bad enough. I had hoped that we'd be able to make the case as well that energy should be exempted because, of course, the Americans benefit from having 4 million barrels a day, most of that coming from Alberta, able to feed their needs. It brings down the cost of gasoline and diesel, which the Americans have said that they want to do. But I think we've got to take the new administration at its word, that there are some pressure points that they want us to resolve before we can even get to those discussions. They clearly do not like to see either Canada or Mexico use as a backdoor for China to be able to have goods come into the American market tariff-free and hollow out their manufacturing sector. They clearly are irritated that we've not met our 2% NATO commitment, and most recently they're irritated about the porous border for drugs, for people. And if we're going to have constructive conversations about trade, we've got to address those issues.
When you said initially responding to this that there was valid concerns, that was a different tone than, say, Doug Ford, who said it's like being stabbed in the back by a family member. I take it, valid concerns doesn't necessarily mean you think that the 25% tariff is justified, though.
No, well, look, I mean, we have been raising the concern about the unsustainable levels of newcomers coming to Canada for some time. We had started off because we'd had declining population saying, oh, great, let's have more people come to Alberta. But we have had 450,000 people come to Alberta in the last 3 years. And a lot of that is because the federal government has really taken off all of the restrictions on newcomers coming into Canada. It's stressing all of our services. And now we're seeing that some people are using Canada as a staging area to sneak into the United States. The Americans have identified that. That's a problem. It's a problem for Canadians, and it's a problem for Americans. We've also been fighting this fentanyl crisis for many years. We have devoted resources to creating specialized teams to address it, a specialized approach to drug addiction to be able to treat those and get them off the streets. So we share a common interest, I think, in addressing the issues of border security and addressing the issues of organized crime and the fentanyl crisis. So let's work on addressing those issues together, and then we can get to the discussion about trade.
Under the first Trump administration, the approach was very much this Team Canada approach that the Conservatives and the Liberals federally kind of came together, so did the premiers. Is that the same approach you're going to use, or kind of reading between the lines and some of what you've been saying, the fact that Alberta has their own envoy in DC now, are you going to be trying to talk to the Trump administration directly yourself?
We've had our own representation in Washington since 2005, and increasingly we've seen that we're the best proponents of our own interests, and we will continue to establish those relationships. I'd very much like to take a Team Canada approach, but I can tell you that Justin Trudeau hasn't made it easy. He hasn't made it easy with the revolving door of crime that we have because of some of the changes that he has made to criminal law. It's not easy because he hasn't been listening to the concerns that provinces have been raising about the uncontrolled number of newcomers coming into Canada. It's a concern for us particularly because he's hit us with carbon taxes, he's hit us with methane caps and oil emissions caps, which we know would reduce production. If we're going to lead with saying to the Americans, we are your solution to energy security, we are your solution to energy affordability, you can't take that message to the table when you've got these additional taxes and production caps layered on top. So we have to have a cohesive message. Part of this is going to be a bit of a climb down for Justin Trudeau on some of the bad policies that he's enacted over the last number of years. He has to recognize some of the things that he has done has not worked, and now it's interfering with our trade relationship with the United States, and that should be everybody's concern.
Donald Trump has talked about wanting to bring back Keystone XL. Does that give you any hope that maybe oil and gas has a better chance than some other Canadian industries of being exempted from those tariffs?
Well, I think there's a good argument to exempt oil and gas. I think when you look at one of the issues the Americans have in keeping their strategic reserve filled, part of that is sweet oil, and part of it is our heavier crude. When you look at their refineries in the Gulf Coast, they have been retooled to accept our heavy oil. Their alternatives are Iran or Venezuela, which I don't think is in the Americans' interest. And we know that by being able to provide that supply of product, it'll achieve one of the big goals that the new administration has of keeping prices down for their consumers. So we think we've got a good argument to make, but I must stress that I don't think we can go to the table with a yeah, but you need our oil so we don't have to take care of these other things that you're concerned about. I think it's a yes and. Yes, we can take care of these things and we can continue to have a great trade relationship, but we have to take seriously the issues that the administration is saying. I think that it's encouraging that he's given us 2 months notice. I think that's an indication
that's enough time.
He wants us to solve these problems, because he could have not telegraphed that at all, and then we would have been hit with it on January 20th. And so now we've got 2 months to be able to come together as provinces and with the federal government to address these concerns in a meaningful way. And I think if we do, then we'll make some great progress. But the clock is ticking.
What are you going to ask the federal government for?
Well, a few things. I'm going to ask them what they intend to do to make sure that we're addressing the border issues. Does that mean that we have dedicated border security? Does that mean that we have more 24-hour border crossings? Does it mean that we start using drones to be able to monitor our extensive border? What are they going to do about the issue of fentanyl and drug dealing? Are they going to repeal some of the policies that they have in the past that have allowed the worst criminals to be going in and out of jail and continuing to wreak havoc on our streets? And are they going to rescind the anti-energy policies that, if they want to lead with talking about how important energy is, then they have to demonstrate it to the province that is principally producing that product for export. And that means get rid of the emissions cap, rescind the carbon tax. Let's talk with the Americans in terms that they will understand based on the new objectives of the new administration.
I don't think it'll surprise you if I tell you your critics will say, well, if you start splintering off like that and demanding the federal government change things for Alberta, or you negotiate with the Trump administration directly, it opens the door for them to find a split. Do you worry about that at all?
Well, look, I mean, my first meeting is going to be tomorrow with Justin Trudeau and my premierial counterparts. I am going to the Western Governors Conference at the beginning of December, so I will be meeting with some allies of the Trump administration and Republicans while I'm down there. I will be going again to the cough table in mid-December. Also, I'll be going to the inauguration, so I've got lots of opportunities to be able to talk both with my Canadian counterparts, but also with our American counterparts. And I think it's got to be an all-hands-on-deck approach. I must tell you, I don't think it's any secret that the personal relationship between the leaders of our two two countries is strained. I think he should be leveraging the relationships that we have to be able to make the case with the governors and the business leaders in the United States so that they can make our case for us. This is a mutual trade relationship. One of the things that when I met with, I had an event I went to where I sat next to Robert Lighthizer, who had been the previous trade negotiator. And one of the things that he said, and he gave me his book, which was nice to have, is that the Americans want fair trade. They want a nation to buy as much stuff from them as they buy from that nation. And we have about as balanced trade as you can possibly get. And so that's why I'm saying that those arguments are not going to be sufficient. Yes, we can make them, but we have to take the administration seriously when it says those other irritants are a non-starter. If we don't address those, we're not even going to get to the table. So yes, I'm going to talk to my counterparts across the country, but we are also going to make the case with our American counterparts that Canada should get a carve-out for a lot of reasons.
Because for the Americans, this is about security, not trade. Canada always sees the relationship from an economic perspective. The Americans see it from a security perspective. What is the situation along the Alberta border?
Well, I can tell you that, I've written a joint letter with the Montana Governor Giannaforte to have a 24-hour border crossing at Wild Horse Crossing, and those are the kinds of things that we think we need, not only to improve trade, but if you've got a border that is being monitored 24 hours a day, that also helps to lend to security too. And it's fallen on deaf ears so far, but those are the kind of things that I would like to see, because what I'm worried about is that we also have a very serious drug addiction problem and drug smuggling crisis in Alberta. And we want to be able to address those in collaboration with the federal government. We've got a lot of product coming in from British Columbia. Maybe one thing they could do is that they could monitor every single container that is coming into the port, as opposed to just 1% of them. If that's the nature of the problem, then why don't we demonstrate that we're doing things to address it? Because Canadians are being impacted by this. The Americans see they're being impacted as well. And I think we would benefit from jointly solving these problems.
We have to wrap. My final question to you would be, what's at stake for Alberta here?
Well, I think one of the things that we've recognized, I certainly recognized since coming into this position, is just how important our relationship is with the Americans. I think that holds true for every provincial jurisdiction. They are our biggest trading partner by a country mile, $188 billion worth of cross-border trade. Our next closest is China at $10 billion. And I would say that it is probably a common story with every single province. And so we can't allow this relationship to be neglected, and we can't allow for these irritants to grow to a point where it ends up impacting that incredibly fruitful and positive relationship that we have. So let's address those irritants, and then let's go back to having the kind of relationship we've always had with the Americans.
Premier Smith, thank you for taking the time to speak to us today.
My pleasure.